In Belvidere, Illinois, the cheers echoed through the factory floor. Stellantis, the global auto giant, announced it was bringing production home, a triumph for the Made in America promise. It was a symbol of hope, a belief that the industrial heartland, after decades of rust and decline, was finally roaring back to life. Across the border, in Brampton, Ontario, the news was devastating. The very same company, Stellantis, announced that the Jeep Compass production line was gone. 3,000 workers, whose livelihoods were tied to that line for years, faced the exact same shockwave that Belvedere had just celebrated escaping. Two auto towns, two communities whose identities were forged in the heat of foundries and the rhythm of the assembly line, facing the same global corporation in the same moment in history. Yet their futures would diverge in a way that few could have imagined. Because while one nation reached for a familiar weapon, the tariff, the other was quietly drafting a new playbook. The American strategy was loud, political, and built on the idea of a trade wall. Washington imposed tariffs reaching up to 27.5%, a move designed to protect its workers from foreign competition. But a wall once built can also become a cage. The cost of steel and aluminum, the very building blocks of the automotive industry, exploded. Supply chains, intricately woven across North America for decades, buckled under the pressure. Volkswagen reported tariff-related costs in the several billions. And for the workers in Belvedere, the promise of security began to unravel into a familiar story of uncertainty. The plant that once employed over 5,000 workers in 2019 saw its workforce thinned out, its shifts become unstable, and its future clouded by what the company called a necessary long-term adjustment. The system designed to protect them had, in a cruel twist of economic fate, failed. The tariff wall had backfired. But what happened in Brampton? Why didn't the same crisis unfold? Why didn't Canadian headlines fill with stories of regional decline and broken promises? The answer has nothing to do with tariffs. It has nothing to do with retaliatory trade measures. It lies hidden in plain sight within the quiet, methodical language of legal agreements and financial strategy. While America was fighting a trade war, Canada was changing the rules of the game. Today, we deconstruct Ottawa's secret playbook, a two-pronged strategy that used the power of law and finance to achieve what tariffs never could. This is the story of how Canada abandoned the trade war and instead used ironclad contracts and a human bridge to save its workers, lock in global corporations, and secure its industrial future. Ottawa's secret, the ironclad contract, the legal weapon. To understand Canada's strategy, we must first understand its core philosophy. For decades, governments across North America have used incentives to attract corporate investment. These are typically tax breaks, land grants, and cash infusions offered with the hope that a company will create jobs and stay. But hope is not a strategy. In the United States, this model has often ended in heartbreak. We've seen the stories unfold time and again. A state offers a massive incentive package, a corporation holds a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and a few years later, the jobs disappear as the company chases a better deal elsewhere. It's a race to the bottom, leaving taxpayers on the hook and communities devastated. Canada decided this cycle was over. They initiated a profound shift in industrial policy, a change best summarized by this powerful idea. An incentive is no longer a one-way ticket out. It is a two-way contract to stay. This wasn't just rhetoric. It was a new legal architecture designed to turn corporate promises into binding legal obligations. And the first major test of this new weapon came when Stellantis threatened to move its production from Brampton, Ontario. This was the critical moment. The old playbook would have involved either offering more money or accepting the loss. Ottawa chose a third option. It enforced the contract. The first signal came from Prime Minister Mark Carney. He didn't threaten tariffs. He didn't engage in a war of words. Instead, he calmly reminded Stellantis of its commitment to the 3,000 workers in Brampton. The word commitment was carefully chosen. It's the language of a legal agreement, not a political speech. It implied that a promise had been made, and that promise was expected to be kept. But the decisive blow came from Canada's Minister of Industry, Melanie Joly. In October of 2025, with negotiations at a standstill, she sent a direct letter to the CEO of Stellantis. Her message was unambiguous. She stated that Canada would, and I quote, enforce all of our legal options if Stellantis was found to be in default under our agreements. This was a tectonic shift in the power dynamic between a nation-state and a multinational corporation. Jolie was not asking. She was not pleading. She was informing Stellantis that they had a contract and that the government of Canada was fully prepared to take them to court for breach of that contract. This was not a bluff. It was a calculated move based on a legal framework years in the making, designed specifically to prevent this exact scenario. This threat was backed by a precise legal mechanism, what we are calling the ironclad contract. It works like this. First, there is a powerful incentive called a countervailing tax exemption. If a corporation continues to produce, employ, and invest within Canada as promised, it receives significant tax relief. This makes it financially attractive to stay and operate in the country. But, and this is the crucial part, if that corporation breaks its promise, it faces the second part of the mechanism, a severe financial penalty. While the exact figure in the Stellantis agreement is confidential, the framework allows for penalties as high as 25% of the original investment. For a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a 25% penalty isn't just a cost of doing business. It's a significant blow to shareholder value and future investment capacity. This mechanism fundamentally changes the calculation for a global company. It turns public money from a simple grant into a high-stakes legal and financial liability. Stellantis was now in a strategic box. They could leave Brampton, but doing so would trigger a costly, high-profile legal battle with a G7 nation and potentially billions in penalties. Or they could stay, honor their commitments, and redirect their investment toward the future that Canada was actively building. They were in checkmate. They chose to stay and invest. The result of this legal maneuver was nothing short of astonishing. Instead of losing 3,000 internal combustion engine jobs, Canada used its legal leverage to secure something far more valuable. Stellantis, in partnership with LG Energy Solution, announced a $5 billion Canadian investment in a new electric vehicle battery plant in Windsor, Ontario. This facility, known as Nexstar Energy, would create 2,500 new high-tech jobs. The ironclad contract had not just saved an old factory, it had birthed a new one. This success created a blueprint. It sent a powerful signal to the global automotive industry. Canada is a stable, reliable place to invest, a country where agreements are honored and rules are enforced. The contrast with the chaotic, tariff-driven environment in the United States could not have been more stark. And other companies were taking notice. Soon after, Volkswagen announced its own monumental investment. The German auto giant committed $20 billion to build its own battery gigafactory in St. Thomas, Ontario, a project that will create another 3,000 jobs. This wasn't a coincidence. Volkswagen had been courted by several U.S. states, but they chose Canada. Why? Because the Stellantis deal had provided proof of concept. It showed that Canada's government was a serious partner, willing to use its legal power to create a predictable and stable investment climate. Volkswagen's leadership called the Canadian plant a national pillar of its EV supply chain. Think about that. Global corporations were now willingly walking into Canada's ironclad agreements. They saw the legal obligations not as a threat, but as a guarantee of stability. While America's tariff strategy created volatility and risk, Canada's legal strategy created certainty. And in the world of multi-billion-dollar industrial planning, certainty is the most valuable commodity of all. Ottawa's secret, the bridge strategy, the human weapon. Securing a new factory is one thing. Ensuring your people can work in it is another challenge entirely. The clean room of a battery gigafactory is a world away from the grease and noise of a traditional assembly line. This is where most industrial transitions fail. You can have a brand new multi-billion-dollar battery plant, but what do you do with a 55-year-old worker from Brampton who has spent 30 years assembling gasoline engines? How does their skill set translate to a clean room environment manufacturing lithium-ion cells? The honest answer is, it doesn't, not without help. In places like Belvidere, Illinois, when a factory closes, workers are often left to fend for themselves. They fall out of the system. They are forced into early retirement or take lower-paying jobs outside of manufacturing, their decades of experience lost forever. Canada recognized that saving a factory is meaningless if you don't save the workers. They understood that the human element was not an afterthought, it was the entire point of the strategy. So while the ironclad contract was locking down corporations, a second, equally powerful strategy was deployed to protect the people. They called it the bridge strategy. It wasn't a rescue package. It was a meticulously designed pathway to move workers from the old economy to the new one, without letting them fall into the gap in between. This bridge was built on two massive financial pillars. The first pillar was the cushion. This was a strategic safety net designed to give workers time and stability. The Canadian government extended its employment insurance benefits, known as EI. For long-tenured workers, those with years of service in the auto sector, benefits were extended by an additional 20 weeks, up to a maximum of 65 weeks. This is a critically important detail. This wasn't just a standard unemployment check. It was a strategic investment in human capital. By providing up to 190,000 workers with income stability for over a year, Ottawa gave them breathing room. It removed the desperation that forces people to make short-term decisions that are detrimental to their long-term careers. They didn't have to take the first low-wage job they could find just to pay the bills. They had time to think, time to plan, and most importantly, time to retrain. And that leads to the second pillar of the bridge, the steer. This was about direction. It's one thing to give people money, it's another to give them a future. Canada launched a $450 million retraining program designed to upskill up to 50,000 workers. But here is the secret to its success, a detail that separates it from countless failed government training programs of the past. The training was, and I quote, tailored to the needs of employers. Think about what this means. These were not generic courses at a community college. These were highly specific training modules designed in partnership with companies like Nexstar Energy and Volkswagen. Imagine government officials, union leaders, and corporate executives from Nexstar sitting at the same table, designing a curriculum. That is precisely what happened. They were training workers for the exact jobs that were coming online. A worker from the old Brampton plant could enter this program and learn the specific skills needed to become a battery cell technician at the New Windsor plant. It was a direct, seamless transition. The government's bridge led them from a closing factory door directly to an opening one. They were not falling out of the industrial ecosystem. They were being guided to a new position within it. But the bridge strategy went even deeper. Ottawa knew that a giant factory like Stellantis or Volkswagen is only the top of the pyramid. Beneath it lies a complex ecosystem of hundreds of small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. These are the companies that supply the rubber, the plastic, the electronics, and the thousands of other components that go into a modern vehicle. If these smaller companies collapse, the entire supply chain breaks down. So Canada's strategy also included a bridge for them. The government deployed a $5 billion strategic response fund. This fund was designed to help Canadian companies adapt, diversify, and enter new markets. For the smaller, often overlooked suppliers, regional support was doubled from $450 million to $1 billion. This wasn't a bailout, it was strategic retooling. This funding helped a small company that once made parts for a gasoline engine pivot to making components for an electric vehicle battery pack. It kept the entire industrial ecosystem intact during a period of massive disruption. It was a holistic, systems-level approach. The ironclad contract saved the anchor firms, and the bridge strategy saved the workers and the supply chain that supports them. It was a masterclass in industrial policy, proactive, legally sound, and fundamentally human-centric. The new playbook in the future of North America. So let us return to our story of two plants. In Belvidere, America chose to build a wall of tariffs. The result was a policy that backfired, increasing costs and ultimately failing to provide the job security it promised. It was a reactive, confrontational strategy that created instability. In Brampton, Canada chose to build a bridge of contracts and financial support. The result was a strategy that succeeded, turning the risk of job loss into the reality of new investment. It was a proactive, legalistic strategy that created stability. This story is about more than just one company or two factories. It marks a fundamental rebalancing of the North American industrial landscape. For decades, Canada operated as what economists call a branch plan economy, a place where foreign companies built factories, but the core strategic decisions were made elsewhere. Through this crisis, Canada has transformed itself. It is now a manufacturing hub with strategic autonomy. It used the transition to electric vehicles not just as a moment to survive, but as a moment to lead. And that is the final, crucial insight. In today's global economy, electric vehicles are not just cars. They are industrial infrastructure. The nation that builds the batteries does not just control a production line. They define the rules of the next economic era. While the United States was focused on protecting the past, Canada was busy building the foundations of the future. The story of Belvedere is not a story of failure, but a warning sign. It shows that if a nation continues to lead with tariffs before strategy, the economic balance can shift faster than anyone expects. We have just deconstructed how Canada used smart contracts to secure its industrial base. And if you want to understand the full story of the EV battery war that Canada is now positioned to win, make sure to watch our next video on the North American battery belt. This Canadian model relies on heavy government spending and legal force. Is this a brilliant new playbook for industrial strength, or is it a form of golden handcuffs that will backfire in the long run? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.